It's the year 1761. You're invited to a dinner party at a massive English estate, chandeliers glowing, servants moving silently across the room, powdered wigs everywhere. The table is loaded with silver dishes and roasted meats, and then it appears. Not gold, not diamonds, not a rare painting. A pineapple. The guests freeze for a second. People stare at it the way we'd stare at someone casually parking a private jet in their driveway. Nobody even eats it. That would almost ruin the point. The pineapple sits there like a trophy, a weird, spiky symbol screaming, "I am richer than you." And here's the insane part. In today's money, a single pineapple could cost the equivalent of nearly $8,000 for one fruit. Now, obviously, something strange was happening in the 1700s, because pineapples today are everywhere. You can buy chunks of them in a plastic cup at a gas station. They end up on pizzas people fight wars over online. They're cheap, ordinary, almost boring. But back then, they were one of the greatest status symbols on Earth. Kings posed with them in portraits. Aristocrats rented them for parties. Wealthy families locked them away like treasure. Some people carried pineapples around without even eating them, just to flex. Which raises a bigger question. How does a fruit become more valuable than jewelry? And honestly, the answer says a lot about human beings. About empire, trade, inequality, obsession, and the strange theater of wealth. Because the pineapple wasn't really about taste. It became something far more powerful. A performance. And if we're being honest, humans still do this exact same thing today. The objects changed. The psychology didn't. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Europe became obsessed with a tropical fruit, how entire trade systems turned it into a luxury item, why people literally rented pineapples by the hour, and how one bizarre obsession exposed the hidden machinery of the early modern world. And before we start, subscribe to Before the Modern World if you enjoy stories about the strange systems, forgotten luxuries, and hidden forces that shaped history. Also, serious question, if you spent thousands of dollars on a pineapple, would you actually eat it? Or would you just leave it sitting there so everyone knew you could afford it? Because in the 1700s, that decision mattered more than you'd think.
The pineapple story really begins far away from Europe, in South America. Long before British nobles were showing them off at dinner parties, indigenous peoples in regions like modern-day Brazil and Paraguay had cultivated pineapples for centuries. For them, it wasn't some mythical luxury item, it was food. Sweet, refreshing, practical, normal. Then European explorers arrived, and, like a lot of things during the age of exploration, normal local goods suddenly became exotic treasures once Europeans saw them. Christopher Columbus encountered pineapples during his voyages in the Caribbean in the late 1400s. European sailors were stunned by them. Imagine tasting one for the first time after months at sea, eating salted meat, stale biscuits, and water that probably tasted like a swampy shoe. The pineapple must have felt unreal. Sweetness itself was already a luxury in Europe. Sugar was expensive. Fresh fruit was seasonal. And suddenly, there was this strange tropical plant that looked like some kind of royal weapon. Armored on the outside, bright gold inside, incredibly sweet. Europe fell in love almost immediately. But there was a problem. Pineapples did not want to cooperate with Europe. They only grew in tropical climates. They spoiled quickly during long sea voyages, and transporting them across the Atlantic was difficult, risky, and expensive. Many rotted before arriving, which made surviving pineapples incredibly rare. And rarity creates prestige faster than almost anything else in human society. People often think luxury is about usefulness or quality. Sometimes it is. But historically, luxury is often about access, about exclusivity, about proving you can obtain something other people cannot. The pineapple became the perfect symbol for that. Because if you had one in 1700s England, everyone instantly understood what it meant. You had money, connections, global reach. You were participating in an international trade system spanning oceans and empires. And that mattered deeply in a Europe obsessed with hierarchy. Imagine being a servant carrying a pineapple into a noble banquet hall. One fruit probably cost more than your yearly income, maybe several years. You'd place it carefully at the center of the table while aristocrats admired it like art. And meanwhile, entire colonial systems were operating behind the scenes to make moments like this possible. That's the uncomfortable layer underneath the pineapple craze. The wealth of Europe's upper classes was increasingly tied to overseas colonies, plantation economies, and global extraction. Sugar plantations in the Caribbean, slave labor, maritime trade networks, expanding empires. The pineapple became glamorous partly because empire made exotic goods available to the elite first. And once elites adopt a symbol, society starts orbiting around it. Soon, pineapples were everywhere in upper-class culture. They appeared in paintings, architecture, furniture, wallpaper, silverware, garden decorations, even gateposts. If you visit old European estates today, you'll still spot pineapple carvings hidden all over the place. It became shorthand for luxury itself. But here's where things get wonderfully ridiculous. Most wealthy people still couldn't easily buy pineapples consistently, so some started renting them. Yes, renting. A pineapple could circulate through multiple social events before finally rotting away. Someone would display it at a banquet, show it off to guests, maybe carry it around town for maximum attention, then return it to a merchant who'd rent it out again. Honestly, it's one of the most human things ever. The fruit basically became an 18th century designer handbag. And you can almost feel the insecurity underneath it all. Because status symbols only work if other people recognize them. A pineapple sitting alone in a dark room means nothing. A pineapple displayed publicly says everything. There's a famous portrait from the 1670s showing King Charles II standing proudly beside a pineapple being presented to him. And the image is almost funny when you look at it today. Everyone acts like the fruit itself is royalty. But at the time, it made sense. The pineapple represented mastery over nature, trade, distance, and wealth. It said Britain could reach across oceans and bring the impossible home. That symbolism became even stronger once Europeans tried growing pineapples themselves. And this is where the story turns into pure obsession. Growing pineapples in England was absurdly difficult. The climate was cold, wet, gloomy. Basically, the exact opposite of what pineapples wanted. But aristocrats became determined to cultivate them anyway, because successfully growing one in Europe was like winning a luxury competition. So wealthy landowners built specialized greenhouses called pineries. These structures were expensive nightmares to maintain. Gardeners used massive amounts of manure to generate heat. Fires had to be constantly managed, temperatures carefully controlled. Entire teams of servants worked to keep the plants alive. And after all that effort, growing a single pineapple could still take years. Years! Imagine dedicating years of labor, fuel, land, and manpower to produce one fruit, mainly so your neighbors would think you were impressive. Actually, maybe don't imagine that too hard. Modern society still does versions of this constantly. That's what makes the pineapple story feel weirdly current. Luxury has always involved inefficiency. Sometimes the waste is the point. The harder something is to obtain, the more socially valuable it becomes. And pineapples became the ultimate proof of elite patience and wealth. If you could afford to heat giant glass buildings in freezing England just to grow tropical fruit, you were operating on a completely different economic level from ordinary people. Meanwhile, outside aristocratic circles, life in the 1700s was brutal for many Europeans. Urban workers struggled with rising food prices. Rural families faced unstable harvests. Disease was common. Child mortality was horrifyingly high. And yet, at the very top of society, nobles competed over decorative fruit. History can feel darkly comedic sometimes. But the pineapple obsession also revealed something deeper about the early modern world. Globalization was accelerating. For thousands of years, most people consumed local goods made nearby. Suddenly, empires connected continents in ways never seen before. Tea from China, sugar from the Caribbean, tobacco from the Americas, spices from Asia. The pineapple became one shiny symbol of a rapidly shrinking world. And that shrinking world created entirely new social behaviors. Because once exotic goods arrived in Europe, people needed ways to interpret them socially. Luxury culture became almost theatrical. Dining tables turned into stages where wealth was performed publicly. That's why presentation mattered so much. Some hosts didn't even cut the pineapple open. The display itself was more important than the eating experience. Honestly, there's something strangely relatable there. Think about how people photograph expensive meals today before touching them. Think about designer brands with giant, visible logos. Think about influencers staging luxury lifestyles online. The technology changed. Human behavior barely moved an inch. We still crave symbols that communicate status instantly, and the pineapple may have been one of history's strangest examples. But eventually, the flex began to weaken. By the late 1700s and into the 1800s, improvements in agriculture, greenhouse techniques, and trade slowly made pineapples more accessible. Costs dropped, availability increased, and once ordinary people could get them, elites lost interest. That's another brutal truth about luxury culture. Exclusivity is fragile. The moment everyone can participate, the symbol loses power. It's why fashion constantly changes, why trends evolve, why wealthy groups keep searching for new markers of distinction. The pineapple's fall from elite status happened gradually, but it was inevitable. What was once nearly priceless became ordinary. And honestly, that transformation might be the most important part of the story, because it reminds us that value is often socially constructed. A pineapple didn't physically change between 1700 and today. Human perception changed. That's it. The fruit stayed the same. Society decided it meant something different. And beneath that shift was an even larger transformation. Industrialization, mass trade, expanding capitalism, and technological progress were making luxury goods more accessible to wider populations. The old aristocratic world was slowly cracking. But during its peak, the pineapple craze exposed the strange emotional machinery of wealth better than almost anything else. People weren't buying fruit, they were buying admiration, recognition, envy, a place in the social hierarchy. And that comes with a human cost we sometimes ignore when looking back at luxury history. Because extravagant displays often depend on invisible labor somewhere else. The elegant dinner parties of Europe were connected to sailors crossing dangerous oceans, enslaved laborers working plantation economies, servants maintaining estates, gardeners tending impossible greenhouses. Luxury can look beautiful from a distance. Up close, it's usually built by many unseen hands. That's the part historical myths often leave out. The pineapple wasn't magical because aristocrats were sophisticated geniuses with refined taste. It became valuable because global systems of trade, empire, labor, and scarcity concentrated rare goods into elite spaces. And once that happened, human psychology did the rest. People competed. They copied each other. They escalated. The fruit became a social weapon. By the early 19th century, though, the pineapple had largely completed its strange transformation from impossible luxury to accessible food. The obsession faded, but traces of its symbolism survived. Even now, pineapples still appear in architecture and decor as symbols of hospitality and wealth. A weird little echo from centuries ago. Most people never notice where that symbolism came from, but now you know. And honestly, the story feels less ridiculous the more you think about it. Because modern society still creates pineapples constantly. Limited sneakers, luxury watches, rare handbags, VIP experiences, exotic cars, artificial scarcity. Status symbols designed mainly to communicate exclusivity. The objects change every generation, the behavior survives. That's the bigger truth underneath this entire story. The pineapple wasn't really about fruit, it was about performance. About humans trying to signal identity, power, and belonging through material objects. And maybe that impulse is older than civilization itself. So next time you walk past a pile of pineapples in a grocery store for a few dollars each, just remember, 3 centuries ago, some aristocrat would have stared at that display like it was a dragon's treasure hoard. And somewhere in 18th century England, a nobleman probably spent a fortune heating a giant greenhouse through winter, all so his dinner guests could whisper, "Good Lord, he owns a pineapple." If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Before the Modern World for more documentaries about the hidden systems, bizarre obsessions, and forgotten realities that shaped history. And tell me in the comments, what do you think is the modern version of the pineapple? What object today instantly signals wealth, even if it's kind of ridiculous when you really think about it? Because history never disappears. It just changes outfits.